Greetings. You are listening to the Native Business Podcast. My name is Gary Davis.
And my name is Carmen Davis.
And we are your hosts. We have a very special guest. It actually seems like we've done this before.
Yeah, kind of does.
I don't know why, but it seems vaguely familiar. This is the Native Business Podcast number 13. We want to remind you, if you haven't already, please download the Native Business app for free on iOS, Android devices, whichever you have. Get the latest business news across Indian country right to your phone, right in the palm of your hand. Push notifications allow you to get the latest and greatest on everything that's happening. And
right away, as soon as they're published.
And especially in this tumultuous world that we're living in right now, with everything happening with this pandemic, it's probably more timely than ever that you get the news as it happens. Also, follow us on social media, Facebook,
Instagram, Twitter,
YouTube. Subscribe and share the word, and we appreciate you. And this again is Native Business Podcast number 13. We have an incredibly special guest. We want to get right to it. It's going to be an amazing conversation. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome to the Native Business Podcast from the Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara Nation, Mr. Chairman Mark Fox. Mr. Fox, Chairman Fox, welcome.
Thank you very much, Carmen, Gary. Appreciate this opportunity to be part of your podcast, and looking forward to our discussion.
So before we get going and we get into it, if it would be okay, maybe give a little bit of background on yourself and three affiliated MHA Nation, and let the folks know a little bit about where you're at and about yourself.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to do that. As you said, my name is Chairman Mark N. Fox, and I am the chairman of the Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara Nation. Collectively, together we're known as the three affiliated tribes by the federal government. And so I've had this honor and privilege of being chairman for about 5.5 years now in my second term. I served previously on council about 8 years in the 90s and early aughts, as they call it. So I've been involved with my tribal government in one manner or the other, in management or in government, for the last pretty much about nearly 30 years, so 25 to 30 years. And so that is my charge today, is to lead our nation, and it's something that I said not only an honor, but something I take very seriously. And Fort Berthold itself is about a 1 million acre reservation. We're located in western North Dakota and along the Missouri River. And this is where we've been at for, in this area along the Missouri for thousands of years. And our story is a very fascinating one in the history of North America and the United States. And so it's an honor to be on here to share with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you and I don't think any tribal nation across Indian country is unaffected by the pandemic, by COVID-19, the coronavirus that we're all very well aware of at this moment. The impacts, of course, have been global. But they have also been right down into the very furthest reaches of Indian country. Describe a little bit about how COVID-19 and coronavirus has impacted MHA Nation.
Yeah, it has come to us the beginning in March there. It kind of seemed like, that this was more of something that was on TV, wasn't a reality to our nation. And although we began to start some of our planning in late January and into February, when we were watching what was going on with the rest of the world, we began to assign responsibilities to start planning for potential and eventual impact to our nation. So I'm thankful that through my administration, my staff, and everybody else that currently helps today, we began to strongly anticipate what might end up happening here. But none of that really became a reality until that first day they say, here's evidence, tested positive case, and it's here on Fort Berthold. And it was really alarming to our people, because what we were seeing on TV, what was happening in Washington State, what was happening in Oregon and California, New York City, became a reality was right on our very own lands that we've held since time immemorial, that it is here. And that was a very stark awakening for our people to realize how serious this is and how it could be if we didn't quickly react.
Many of our tribal nations have found themselves today in places across this country that could never have been planned. Of course, we have the Seminole tribe right there and pretty much in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We have many of our other tribal nations in California located in epicenters today of population. You find yourself in a unique situation being located in the Bakken and that shale formation. And subsequently, oil and gas has been a huge economic development revenue generator for the nation. Speak about how the pandemic has impacted and affected that source of revenue for the nation.
Yeah, it very much has. As you're aware that, oil and gas for the last decade, the domestic development in the United States, with this current administration trying to be energy dominant, but it's more about right now about economic security, and the tribes throughout the United States and us being the leading producer of volume of barrels per day, we play such a significant role in the economic security of the United States that any impact to that has very moving and very decisive impacts to that economic security. And so here we are as a tribe that has spent about 10 to 12 years of reinvesting and drawing capital and through taxation, building this infrastructure that right now today is in serious danger of being nearly totally wiped out. And why? Because the price of a barrel of oil, which has in times past, in 12, 13, and 14, 2012, 13, and 14, we saw a barrel of oil out in the United States, and our type of oil is called WTI, West Texas Intermediate. It's a sweet crude. But we saw that go as high as $120, $130 a barrel. If you take a historic average of 12 years, we're probably at around $70 a barrel, 75. But then all of a sudden you see, not only because of a smaller price war going on supply out in the world between OPEC and Russia and some other countries, but all of a sudden in comes this pandemic, which drastically affected consumption. Now you got a price of a barrel of oil going negative for the first time in history. First time in history where on the stock market, the value of this commodity went to at one point minus 40, but settled in that devastating Monday, went down to minus $38 in value. Basically meaning, you're paying people to take it away, and they're not paying you. And so you put all this together, it is the perfect storm for such an economic crisis for oil and gas in Indian country that, we're greatly alarmed, greatly concerned, and that's part of why we're really pushing hard for America, United States government, say, you better not forget about this critical part of economic security, oil and gas and energy in general, so main stem to what the United States does. You sure as heck better not forget about those that possess those valuable commodity, because in the United States, 30% of the non-renewable resources that this country currently has, the known deposits and known reserves, crude reserves, are in Indian country. And so we've got to see some deliberate effort to protect that. And so right now, in anticipation of what's coming, we're starting to reel a little bit. And here's the problem is, Carmen and Gary, is that there's a delay effect in oil and gas. The way it's conducted and the way business is done, you have about a 2-month delay effect. So as though we stand here in April, we're really standing on the revenue raised in February. Okay. So when May hits, you're really talking about March. And then when June hits, you're talking about where we're standing today, where a value of the barrel of oil is either negative or only about today, I think it was $13. And so, plus you got numerous companies, partnerships out in the field, lessers and lessees, shutting in wells, drastically reducing output of barrels of oil. All this is just a perfect storm for impacting our tribe eventually by hundreds of millions of dollars.
And speaking to that, to illustrate the drastic disparity between tribal oil revenues now compared to this time last year, how different were tribal oil and gas royalty revenues in late April 2019?
Yeah, well, like I said, with a 2-month delay effect, it hasn't been as drastic drop as one would assume. But right now we're looking at, when we had a financial meeting yesterday, we're looking at about 15% loss from a year ago in April. Now with the majority of late March and April, with the price of barrel oil into April here, I anticipate we'll probably in May, when we're looking really at activity in March, we're looking at probably 40 to 50% reduction of where we were at the year before. And then by June, the knockout punch is coming. June is when we could see a loss of anywhere from 80 to 90% of our revenue that we had the previous June. That's what's in store for us unless a couple of things happen. Two things that's got to happen is the federal government can't forget about us and other tribes. The 10 tribes are heavily into energy development. Can't forget about us. Help us just like they're going to help the producers, like they're going to help states. They need to be helping our tribal nations with those assets, similar to what we've done in the CARES Act with the $8 billion. But you got to, our loss is going to be much more significant than through that package. And so that's one thing that's going to happen. The federal government's got to pay attention and helping us. And then the second thing is that we've got to cross our fingers that the consumption rate goes up, the demand goes up, and that the price of the barrel oil will follow that upward, so that we got some hope and light at the end of this tunnel.
Given all of that, Mr. Chairman, what has the current stimulus funding, how has that impacted you compared to how it might impact other tribal nations?
Well, it's going to be far more severe. I mean, all Indian country needs help. We're all going to suffer to some degree. Some of the tribes have far less assets and, resources. And so when the pandemic hits them, they're going to suffer greatly as well, of course. So we'd always been advocating to help all the tribes. And I'll just straight up say that, $8 billion out of $2.2 trillion is very, very small, considering land-based population and the role that we play in the United States of America is really small. And then causing, 500 and some tribes to divvy that up and combine with other corporations and et cetera. I mean, you're going to really, the slice of the pie is going to be so small that, it's going to help, but it's not going to really help offset our losses the way we expect. Now, that being said, here at Fort Berthold, if they turn around and they give us a package, and let's just say it's 20 or 30 million ultimately, like some other tribes, if we're looking at $200 million in losses to our economy, $200 million loss between now and Christmas, and we get a stimulus of $20 million, $30 million, that's still a negative of $170 million. And so down the line here, anticipating those types of losses, you can see by just dollars by themselves that it's going to be so difficult to build out of that.
Anything on the horizon, anything that you're hearing about that is going to be on its way from the federal government, anything from Treasury or any stimulus that you're aware of? And if so, how is MHA Nation working to secure those funds?
Well, yeah, we are hearing that, that from the White House to Congress that they are going to consider a round 4. And in that round 4 of a stimulus package, they are going to attempt to address the energy sector in the United States. But what I'm hearing quite a bit, of course, is that it's going to be the producers. It's going to be the major producers. I'm hearing that there might be taxation relief for the states that rely on that. But what I'm not hearing, with our ears to the ground and with our people up there lobbying hard, is that right now we're not hearing the inclusion of the tribes. And so we put, like I said in the outset of this broadcast, the tribes play a significant role in energy, the economic security of energy development in this country. So, we're really concerned about that. So here's what we've been doing is we've been putting our numbers together. We're getting letters out there. We're getting our local producers who rely on our success just as much as we rely on theirs. We're asking the governor to step up. We're reaching out to the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, Chairman Hoven. We're working through liaisons with the White House. We're working with the Department of Energy from the Indian Energy Branch and saying, you can't forget the tribes, the small number of tribes that have a critical role in energy development, but who have also wisely taken their resources and furthered the infrastructure to continue our energy development. But that's all going to be undermined and lost, devastatingly lost, if you don't figure a way to include us in these packages as well. Don't forget us is my basic message. And if they don't forget us, we'll make it through this. Just like others, we'll make it through this storm. But to forget us could radically change how energy can be developed in Indian country. And quite honestly, it could, the potential for continued development in Indian country could fall out. The bottom would fall out, and that it could take decades to recover, not just a year or two. Very, very critical.
Mr. Chairman, the lack of physical storage space for oil is also an issue. What are some of the temporary solutions? Are there solutions that oil companies are resorting to? I believe you have some storage there. What's the future look like with storage facilities?
Really key, storage facilities that now the United States has just figured that out. And somebody on the drawing board and planning, would have seen this in the event of a pandemic and a financial crisis and demands going down and consumption going down and world markets complicating it further. All these different things that, where if the oil is going to come out of the ground, somebody's going to buy it, where are you going to store that until consumption goes up? Very critical. But obviously was not well planned, because that's the problem that we've got going on out in the world right now in the United States is that these producers are still pushing the oil out there for, basically amounting to pennies, and yet there's nowhere to store it. And paying people to take the oil away and not getting paid for people to buy it and store it. And so how does this impact us here? We have small storage, but we have been in contact through the governor and through our representatives on a national level and saying, look, we're sitting right on top of one of the biggest formations in the world, one of the most productive formations of oil and gas in the world. You should be stepping forward and helping our tribe create massive storage areas, millions and millions of barrels. We have the ability to do that. If the federal government would step up and say, either through the same type of programs you see under the CARES Act with SBA, step up and say, well, here, energy loans, here's what you can build massive storage, and a percentage or a portion or all of what we take to build those, so critical to United States security that at some point in time they'd say, well, we'll waive off, we'll convert some of those loans to grants and waive off the amounts owed to be able to address this issue of storage. And where better to store it than right below, our feet and on the grounds where a significant portion of this nation's daily output comes from. North Dakota, the Bakken crude, it was at about 1.4, approaching 1.5 million barrels per day. And so now I understanding when talking with the governor that, of course, that number is bound and set in the next 60 days to go well below 900,000, 800,000. It could go further and further as wells are being shut in, as production is being slowed, as the drilling has come to a halt. All these things that we're rolling along, all this investment is really, really in great danger. And so, it's really key. I'm glad you brought that up. Storage is critical. And here we are as one tribe saying we have and we can expand on our ability to do that if the federal government helps us.
Mr. Chairman, many across Indian country have a love-hate relationship with oil, with petroleum, and some just have a hate relationship with it. And it's interesting, just not very far from where you guys are located, we have Standing Rock, and we have, of course, the major protest that went on there, and I know that MHA supported and stood with the folks over at Standing Rock. And as I was there, and I took our son, and we were there while all of that was going on with the encampment, it did dawn on me that everybody that got there used oil and gas to get there, and that everybody was running their camps, generators powered by gas, and people that had flown there from all over the place used gas and fuel to get there. And it seems, that we have to come to an understanding, a reality that it's part of the economic fabric of this country, and we have to find our way through it. And as much as the Bakken has played a role in MHA's current economic prosperity and the growth of the nation, that your mind has never been, I don't believe personally your mind has ever been just focused on that. I know that you have other resources there. You have other visions of how to move beyond just oil and gas. And it would be wonderful, I think, if you could speak to some of those visionary ideas that you have and the things that you've created in the way of initiatives, and I think specifically around water and around agriculture.
Oh, appreciate that very much, both of you, Carmen and Gary. The contention and the issues that surround energy development, and in particular fossil fuel development, they're out there. And it is right for Indian country to really think hard, be very focused on some of the resources that are non-renewable that exist in Indian country and how we're going to approach those. That's why what occurred right here in North Dakota shows an example of that. We were there to support Standing Rock for a reason, and because it's still our firm belief as a tribal nation that does develop its energy resources, that each and every nation, through their sovereignty, has to make a choice about what they want to do with their own resources. And so when one tribal nation says, well, we're going to approach it this way, and how we participate or how we don't participate with energy development, we would be the first tribe to be there to say, if that's their choice, we support them. But we also want that reciprocated, and I believe it is, with the leadership there and the people. MHA Nation says, well, we do have valuable resource, and we're going to develop that resource, that they would support our rights to do that, and they have. And so our fellow nation, tribal nation, Standing Rock, has been strong in saying that we respect your choices too, as much as you respect our own. So that being said, for us here at MHA Nation, we have made a deliberate and strong choice to take a limited and finite resource, a non-renewable energy resource, oil and gas, and we have made a deliberate decision to go ahead and take that value and sell it to market for the hopes and ultimate goal of taking the revenue and the resources that stem off of that, create new business opportunities, not just for ourselves, but for individual members, allow many of our 2/3 of our revenue go to individual members, allottees, IIM holders. And so 2/3 of that revenue is now finally making a change to the standard of living for so many people. They finally have some resources to get a home, get resources to maybe trade in their car, to provide clothing for their children, for their grandchildren, to have some things they never had before. So we continue to promote this. But the overall goal is to take those resources and then reinvest them. Reinvest. Yeah, it is a limited resource, and we can't rely on it forever. And so we're going to take what we earn and what revenue we realize, and we're going to use that to build other areas of our economy that will be more self-sustaining for the long term. And so that's what we've been doing in building infrastructure, reinvestment, and moving things along, all the while trying to raise the standard of living for our people, healthcare, building brand new schools, building new law enforcement centers, building new roads, building new homes and houses. We've been doing all these things, raising the standard of living and building infrastructure by the sale of this finite resource. but all with the overall goal that will be realized over the next 2 or 3 generations, building up alternative ways to sustain or build our economies. That's really the key here, is taking that resource and building it. Now, as you had mentioned earlier, one of those things, our goal is always to diminish federal dependency, and we can get back to that after a bit here. But the reality is that we're going to take this valuable resource and we're going to build an infrastructure so that we don't have to rely on the federal government. We don't have to rely on outside entities for our very own existence and support, because that's true sovereignty. True sovereignty means that you're exporting goods. That means you're creating opportunities and you're not relying on anybody. It's too hard to develop those things if 90% of what you do is dependent on somebody handing you something. And so we really have made great strides towards that. One of those sectors, of course, we believe that what they call food sovereignty. We believe that we should be not only raising and producing our own food for our own consumption, but it should be an export item as well, too. We have the capacity. Much of Indian country does. Plenty of water, opportunity. We've got gas up here that can be compressed and used to generate light and heat, and use the carbon dioxide to fuel the plants that they need. And we can be exporting these goods. And so we're still moving in that direction. So all with the idea of creating these other long-term sustainable economic projects. Water, water is more valuable than oil. Always has been, always will be. But we want to take what we have in that finite resource of oil and gas and enhance what water is going to do for us economically now and in the future. So this is all part of the philosophy, and the background of all this is lessening dependence on those who are controlling how we live, controlling whether or not we're ever going to prosper. That's the federal government. And as you see what's going on with the pandemic, that's not working out so well for us. And we've got to have some lessons learned here quickly.
I think Carmen went from smiling to almost crying, because, this is our passion, to see Indian country become more self-sufficient, self-sustaining. I know it has been what you have preached from the economic pulpit. You've said that there may be a time that comes that Indian country is going to be impacted if there is a downturn in the economy, if federal funding were to subside, and we're seeing it. It shouldn't be really a surprise to any of us. It's always been there. We've always been dealing with it. And now we're seeing through this pandemic, Indian country still caught up through bureaucracy, red tape, an inability to deploy resources to our communities. What are your thoughts, again, for those out there still thinking that economic development is just through one revenue stream, that diversity is not that important? I think it's shown us that diversity is key.
Yeah, I agree. In the long term, you've got to have that diversity. The eggs in the different baskets, as we talk about, you have to have those in place. But first and foremost, a lot of tribes have to get a revenue stream going first and foremost. We've had that in the way of gaming for some, very fortunate for some tribes, and I'm very grateful and thankful that they've have this opportunity to further their tribe's economic status by gaming. But there are so many tribes out there that don't have any economic streams whatsoever. So, diversification is real difficult for them. So on one hand, we got to get people to change some of their mindset and start looking at bringing in revenues by themselves or by any means that they feel necessary, and not relying on the federal government. Because so many tribes, the majority or 90% of their revenue stream comes in a form of federal contracting or grants. And that's not going to change anything. At the best, keep things as they are economically and socially. The only way that you can change an economy to a given sector in anywhere in the world is when outside revenue comes in, and not the one we're depending on by the federal government. Yes, we have to hold the federal government's feet to the fire. They owe us. They literally owe us for things taken from us. And we're governments like any other government. We pay taxes federally like everybody else. We will keep their feet to the fire. But to depend solely on that will be our demise. We've got to open up other revenue streams coming onto the reservation, bringing those dollars in, then economies start to change. But if you recirculate the same old federal dollar that comes in, and most of that, as we know, goes back out, we buy our supplies from somewhere else, so the feds inject it by contracting, and then it goes back out to vendors that have nothing to do with the reservation, and sometimes aren't even in taxing the process, right? And so we got to change that whole scenario. And so then once you start getting the revenue stream, then you start taking your success in one area, you shift it over to another. So less dependency on that one stream. Now you got 2-3 different streams of revenue. Next thing you know, you begin to diversify. You spread that out and strategically. And the next thing you know, even though one particular area might be suffering, as we've seen with the pandemic today, not everybody in the United States is hurting at the same level economically. There are certain sectors in the United States that are doing okay. They're not suffering as much, but there are others that are crashing, and it's been terrible. And so you put those, think about the whole situation there. Indian country's got to learn from that. And so then you start diversifying, you start spreading things out, and anything that's got potential for growth. And all the while, what are you doing? You're diminishing that reliance on the federal government, reliance on entities that at any given time can say, you know what, I don't have any more for you. You're on your own. And that's exactly the message that our Indian people need to be listened to, because they read between the lines. That's exactly what's occurring right now, is that, you know what, we got this pandemic thing going on through the whole United States, and guess what? We're not here to help you any more than what it's going to take for you to survive. Who wants to be caught up in that? We certainly don't want to be in that. Our tribe learned already. We've had smallpox. We lost 90% of our population. We lost 90% of our land holdings, recognized by treaty in 1851. We've lost and we've lost and we lost. And the only damn way, excuse my language, but the only damn way that we're ever going to change that is that we recognize it for what it is and start getting our feet firm on the ground, start digging and start working hard to not rely on anybody else, and start bringing that income in and creating our diversity and our different baskets that are sustain our people and not only survive, but thrive. So we got to learn our hard lessons now and say it's wake up time, America, and especially in Indian America, it's wake up time. So we've got to do things differently from this day out.
Mr. Chairman, I love the passion. I love the passion. And you know what? You can say damn on this podcast.
Right. I could edit that out.
We won't. We'll leave it in there, because I think sometimes you just need a damn just to make sure that people are really paying attention. Speaking about this, when we finally get economic development going and we get diversity and we get a revenue stream coming in, I know there has been no one more passionate about dual taxation than you. And again, I don't want to get your blood pressure going too much, but you've been able to make some really amazing inroads with the state, from where you were to where you are. I know it's still a work in progress, but speak a little bit about dual taxation and your efforts there.
Yeah, a very, very important issue. And then just to fall back on your comments about blood pressure here, I got a couple brothers and I love them to death, and they always got high blood pressure, and I tease them, I give them hell all the time, because I say, you guys always hold things in and get upset and hold things in. Contrary to me, I don't have high blood pressure because I'm always letting it out, as you can tell.
You can keep letting it out here.
I got these valves and I keep opening them up. But, very, really critical issue that you're talking about, dual taxation. One of the things that has hampered us the most, lack of resources and investment capital is a big one. But one that's right up there with that is what we call dual taxation. And what does that really mean? It means that as soon as the tribes create some type of economic sector or some type of economic machine and get a product that might be able to do exactly what we mentioned earlier, might be able to create a revenue stream, in comes the state as well saying, well, hold on here, we get to tax that process too. That creates dual taxation because the tribes are entitled to tax that as sovereign governments within our own boundaries for any economic activity. But then you got the outside, the state, surrounding states saying, oh, we get to tax that as well. Now you got dual taxation. So let's take, for an example, in the state of North Dakota with oil and gas, right? you've got a situation where an industry might be willing to come in, invest, and extract that resources if they're paying 10% or 11%, right? But if they're facing two sets of taxation at 10% as well, now you got 20%. And a lot of that development is just not going to occur. And it forces tribes. It forces tribes to get into agreements with states that economic process will occur, that extraction of oil and gas. But what happens in that situation is that the states often own the upper hand. And so they get to dictate the terms of that dual taxation. They get to determine how that's going to work, or it's not going to happen at all. Dual taxation, 99% of the time, prohibits the development of our resources. And so we've got to take some bold steps. We've got to get federal support to say, look, the economies on the reservations need help. It's just like an injection of capital, like what's going on now with the pandemic. That's exactly what the United States government is doing for all the rest of the United States. Is saying, man, you're headed for some bad times. We're going to inject some free money into that situation. Well, on the reservation, when you got something that's ready to move forward, a revenue stream that could thrive, look at it as the same way. The fact that the state is not able to tax is an injection of capital itself as well. That there's only one entity taxing and avoiding dual taxation becomes an injection of capital itself as well. That starts moving the tribe forward. So what we need is the federal government to finally make that choice and say, look, the tribes are never going to build themselves out of this as long as we put those type of hurdles in front of them. Let's pass something that says the only entity within our boundaries on our lands that should be taxing that or be allowed to tax is the tribes themselves. And if we can do that, that economic stimulus that we need now, pandemic or otherwise, is really going to start moving tribes forward. Without that in place, very, very difficult.
And talk about some of your successes there in the state, because I know even tribal leaders that are listening to this, tribal members who are listening to this, and even folks from outside of the community that are getting an education right now on some of the things that they may have not even understood are issues. I think it's good for all of those different folks to hear the successes that you've made, even in working with the state and holding your ground and being bold. Speak a little bit about the progress that you've made there locally.
One of the biggest successes we've had, and it took time. It did not happen overnight, but as the oil boom began back in 2008, 2009, so 10, 11 years ago, the state came in and they fostered and pushed on a state tax agreement that in the end result, after a few years, we quickly recognized was heavily in their favor and less on ours. Now, after the fact, it remains that that's what had to happen to make industry come in and develop our resource. We had to have a sole and single taxation system. It just shouldn't have been crafted that way in the beginning, but it was. So from that point forward, from about 2010 and 11 forward, it's always been for the last 8-9 years, our goal to get back in there and say, now, hold on here. We'll both mutually benefit. We'll develop this economy. We'll change how North Dakota operates. We play, we're about 20% of the production in the whole state. That 1.4 million barrels per day, 20% of that, but, or a little less perhaps, is what has been developed on the reservation. So we're a critical part of that. And the state itself has really thrived for the last 10, 12 years. But, in that scenario, we knew that we had a right to more of that money. Why? Because if you take away 50%, and we eventually changed in 2013, we had the tax agreement change to 50-50, basically splitting it even where it wasn't even before. So you take that 50% away, and then eventually, through our lobbying over the next 4 to 6 years, we finally got it passed last year, where on trust land production, where most of the production is on Fort Berthold today, we finally got the state, and I thank the governor and I thank those legislative leaders, although it took a long time, that finally said, okay, it will help stimulate you more if you retain more of that tax. So we went to an 80-20 where the tribes, our own tribal nation, off of production on trust land is now retaining 80% of that tax revenue, which we now use for infrastructure, now use to move other sectors of our economy, now move to create another economic stream, now move to building more infrastructure and raise the lifestyle of all of our membership. That happened because we were able to convince them that what is good for Fort Berthold, if we prosper and we build more infrastructure and continue this economic development, so does the state. There was a time when we had a study done in 1999, 2000, about 20 years ago. There was a study that once said that all the tribes in North Dakota had about a $2 billion impact to the economy of the state, positive impact. Well, Fort Berthold, by itself now, because of the moves that we've made, has a double positive impact now of $4 to $5 billion. Could be higher. We have to do another study. $4 to $5 billion impact to the economy of the state of North Dakota. So when we were able to demonstrate that, able to show that if you allow us to retain more of that taxation under our agreement, that we'll be able to recapitalize things and continue the development. And exactly that's what occurred. In 2019, once the agreement was again mutually signed off, we had a 4-year period. When I came in, we did not have a mutual agreement signed off. They changed the agreement. We objected to it, and we said the agreement of old is in place. Where they said, no, you got to incorporate changes. We said that's not the way it works. It has to be mutual agreement. So for 4 years, there was instability. 4 years. And finally, we realized and got it signed off a year ago, mutually signed agreement. The drilling immediately took off. More drilling occurred last year than the previous 3-4 years. So it did have that impact. What I'm getting at is that it takes time. You got to be patient, but you also have to be very firm. You got to be strong. You got to be strong in this. You have to show a win-win situations every time you can. If it's just one side saying, I deserve to have this, you deserve to have less, it's difficult. But if you can demonstrate that, you can get into business negotiations and deals in which you create win-win situations, then it benefits everybody, and it's going to happen. So that's what we're able to do in that situation.
A couple more things that I want to get to before we get off here, and I know that we're running close on time here, but as the western part of the United States is already in the beginning stages, and I don't know if a lot of folks know this. I think folks in California probably are very aware with all the fires and the increased fires. There is a 1,200-year drought that we're beginning.
It's a mega drought.
It's actually, they're calling it a mega drought, and we're well into that 1,200-year cycle with regards to water and what that'll mean, and your thoughts there, because it's such a powerful, meaningful resource to our people. But give us your thoughts there about how that specifically relates to MHA Nation and your vision for the future.
Yes, it goes back to what we said, and I appreciate you for bringing it up. Water is so critical, and it's just not a slogan, as we've seen in the years past. And I haven't got one of my most favorite pictures I've got is my son holding up a sign that says, without water, there is no life. And it is true. And not just for physical sustenance, but water economically is really critical. So you have to have water to develop your economy one way or another, whether it's feeding yourselves or exporting crops or industry purposes or whatever you may do. Water plays such a critical role that you got to have usage of that and very well developed uses of it. So here at Fort Berthold, we've been moving in that direction. Water is necessary for our energy development. The tribe has capitalized on that to the point where we raise revenues, and then we use that revenue for further economic development and to take care of our people. But as you're alluding to, the world is rapidly changing, whether people want to admit it or not. And this 1,200-year drought, yes, there have been in history droughts that have occurred. We know that. But I think this one is uniquely different because the drought, that 1,000-year plus drought that it seems to be in western and southwestern United States, that is being compounded again by some of the things that's going on with global warming, where the average temperature last year was higher than previous 40, 50. There is changes going on. There are so many, as the article that I read, similar to what you're alluding to about the 1,000-year drought, is that it talked about the frozen polar cap by 2050 will, at least during the season of summer, will not be frozen and will be pure water. So we know that in the future, water is going to become even more critical. Water is going to be relied on even more as it becomes more scarce. The demand is going to go up. So in anticipation of that, we began to do some of our projects were leading towards that, where water usage here on Fort Berthold will increase, growing our crops, using it for other energy purposes, but we also would be in line to start storing water, just like we're going to store other resources of oil and gas. We're going to process it, and we're going to go ahead and make that available as the demands go up with this water scarcity. It is part of our economic plan as well to carefully plan for how we can go ahead and develop our water resources as well, so that it can alleviate the economic stress that's going to occur to the west in the United States, but also at the same time, just like we're doing with our energy resources, to take that revenue stream and reincorporate that in investment into our children for education and to everything else that we need to do. So again, water. I always tell people this, that over the next 100 years or longer, that what we do with water is going to have more economic impact to our MHA Nation than what we'll ever do with oil and gas. And that is, I truly believe that, knowing that and thinking that, that's where we're heading to properly develop it. And I encourage all the tribal nations out there to go ahead and try to wisely and strategically utilize their water for economic purposes now. Because if you don't do that, I am greatly concerned that you don't substantiate your uses, both current and future. Somebody at some point in time is going to come in and say, you're not using it, just like they did with our land. You're not using it. We're going to take it away from you. And we want to be in a position to say, baloney. We are using it. It's an important part of this nation's economic security, and you need to back off and leave it alone. And that's my basic message.
Thank you for that. Such strong, poignant thoughts. And shifting gears a little bit, food sovereignty. If you could discuss a little bit about what MHA is doing with the Greenhouse Initiative.
Yeah, Greenhouse is one of our projects that, of course, is taking a little longer than I thought it would. Nothing ever happens overnight, but we still have the vision and we still have the movement towards establishing greenhouses on Fort Berthold. As you both know, you're able to venture there as well. We didn't try to reinvent the wheel. We come from an agricultural society. We were the first farmers in this region for thousands of years, an Aboriginal trade center. And the crops we grew made us that way. Corn, beans, squash, watermelon, all these things that we did, our economy that we had agriculturally put us in that position for thousands of years. But we lost all that. It was taken away from us and destroyed by failed federal government policy. So we're simply trying to revive that again, something that's in our bones, in our blood, that we know can be a significant part of what we do. And it's reoccurring, right? It's sustainable if we do it right. But we learn by watching a small country in Europe do exactly that, become one of the leading, second only United States, leading exporter of agricultural goods in the world. They're in the Netherlands there. And we went there and we studied. Ironically, we went to their country and studied there instead of them coming to ours, the Dutch. But we went there to learn how such a tiny country who's got two prevalent things, a lot of water, gas, how are they able to be so successful and raise billions of dollars per year, and they're a tiny country. So we're trying to learn from them, and we have learned from them. Now we're in a position, we've got land acquisition, we've got the planning for the greenhouse, our first demo one, our first prototype greenhouse is on its way, albeit slowly because of what we're dealing with now economically. We're still moving forward with that. It's our hopes to still have that up and running, I hope, within a year. We're moving. And once we can establish the success of this one prototype, this one flagship greenhouse, we're going to demonstrate that it is economically viable and then reinvest the monies to building more and more so that we can get to the point, same as they do in Holland. We can get to the point where we're exporting so many goods that, you walk up to the local Walmart that's off the reservation in Minot, North Dakota, or Bismarck, and you're going to see products on the shelves in Walmart or some grocery store, and they're going to say that cabbage, those green peppers, those carrots, those items came from a greenhouse in which they're taking their resources and they're growing food 365 days out of the year. And it's not only sustainable, but a profitable way of exporting goods. Again, changing how we do things at Fort Berthold, getting back to what we once had hundreds of years ago, where outsiders depend on our economic capabilities, and all through that process, changing our lives for the positive here. The greenhouses, we're moving forward on that. I'm excited about it yet, even though this pandemic, of course, is a serious interruption to that. I'm still happy with that because, we've got parts ordered, the designs are being completed, we've got the land, all those things in place. We just got to start growing those darn things and then finding people to buy it, and I think it's really going to be successful. It is the vision that we have not only for our tribe, for our tribal nation, it's a vision that we have for all of Indian country, because I think inherently our people want to do things like that. They want to take that water. They want to figure out alternative source of power and grow that all year long in a controlled environment, and then not only consume healthy products for our membership, we'll get healthier, but to say to the non-Indians, to the white man, say, here, you want to buy these? And they'll come in, they'll purchase them, take them away. All of a sudden, the economy is changing. That's the key here.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your vision, MHA's vision. The purpose of Native Business Podcast is to share our thoughts, ideas, and we all learn from each other. So thank you so much for your words. They're powerful. Gary's right. There was several times where, it brought tears to my eyes because they're just so powerful. These words and ideas and the models need to be shared across Indian country and outside of Indian country. So thank you. I appreciate that. And all of this is truly speaking to and about self-sustainability. I got caught up there.
Sufficiency.
And sufficiency. I wanted to merge them together. And that's something that our people, our leaders, I think every one of us, like you just said, we desire that. We want that. Our ancestors want that for us as well. So thank you. And, as we wrap up here, if there are any words, thoughts, anything else that you would like to share
on leadership specifically.
On leadership with our listeners, I would appreciate that.
And Mr. Chairman, I probably think you could give us how many days you have left in your term. I know you keep a track of that as part of your checking yourself every day as to what you're doing or you're not doing. So some of the things that you might be able to share with leadership, about leadership, for folks out there that might not even be in tribal leadership or are trying to do better in their life, some of the things that you do every day when you wake up that help you be a great leader, if you might share with the listeners some of your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate that. First and foremost, let me kind of comment about the both of you. I've known you for some time now and worked with you, and it's been an honor and a pleasure. I really appreciate your focus on economic development as you have in the past and you're doing today via this podcast and every other means. Your emphasis on and your focus on economic development is really the answer to Indian country. The social economic poverty that is devastating and keeps us devastated is all linked towards changing our economies. If we change our economies, those things will begin to change. If we never change our economies where we have self-reliance and an ability to export goods, then nothing's going to change. So we have to keep hitting that message, and you guys have done an awesome job of that. I want to commend you both. That is the key. That is the primary key. It's not the only key, but it is the primary key for Indian country is economics. And if you change the economics, then we got hope, and we are going to regain what we once had. I feel strong about that. So keep hitting them with that message and keep working strong and Indian country is going to be different because of people like yourselves, really pushing that message and really supporting and promoting it. And so back to myself, what we got going on. I guess the final comment to our, to tribal leadership and tribal members out there is that we've got to use what's occurring with this pandemic as a hard lesson learned about why we have to do things differently in the future. That's the primary focus. And that ranges not only from economics on a broad scale that we have been talking about for a while on this podcast, but it also has to do with how we view ourselves socially, our health, living better, finding better ways to live, making the longevity of our lives better. We should not be having a 50 to 52-year-old average lifespan for our membership that is beyond comprehensible, that we would accept and allow that to factor how we exist. So we have to start getting healthier. We have to do things differently, and we have to evolve. We have to change. Our people have been doing that for thousands of years. Sometimes our people talk about the way we used to be and the way we were, and I always answer back to them, or question back to them, and say, what point are you talking about? Because the reason why our people are still standing here today, despite everything that happened to us, is we're very strong and resilient because of what happened to us, but we still stand here today. But the thing that people don't always appreciate is our ability to evolve, our ability to withstand what's going on around us, evolve, and still survive. And we've been doing that for thousands of years, and most recently for the last 150 years, despite all the devastation in a failed federal government policy. Here we stand with an opportunity to try to regain what we had, albeit it's going to take time and hard work, period. We are hardworking people. We are survivalists, not because, somebody was always standing around trying to help us. We have survived for thousands of years because we are damn hardworking people. We are tribal. We think of ourselves in this pandemic situation. I compare what goes on in the big cities off the reservation with non-tribal members, in which the nuclear family, in which the individual, their lives are more important than the tribe as a whole. They have no tribe. We're different. When one part of our tribe is under attack, or one part of our tribe is suffering, that's an attack. That's a need for the rest of the tribe to stand forward. It's that tribalism that has caused us to survive, sticking together, changing our mindset on how we're going to go forward in the world from here out. Tribalism together, say, okay, we learned another hard lesson, and we're going to move forward in a different way. And that's my recommendation. Hanging on to those things that are critical, hanging on to those values that help us survive, but always ready to adapt, ready to evolve, and sticking together and doing that. And I think that's really going to go a long way. I believe that, just like you said, whether it's prophecy or otherwise from others, that there will be a day in which we have regained what we once had, strong economies, strong people, and demonstrating to the rest of the world the uniqueness of who we are.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you.
First thing that comes to your mind, whether it's a word, whether it's just one sentence, we ask this at the end of all of our podcasts. What does native business mean to you?
Native business means to me, it has to be a sustainable, but also has to be something that has potential for development. I hear that in Indian country all the time, economic development. Economic development is not taking a pot of money or resources that might come from the outside, a grant or a capital injection, and then running a program that 2 or 3 years later no longer exists because it wasn't profitable. We have to understand that business is business. You take those resources and you operate in a profitable manner. If you can't, then it doesn't make any sense to move forward for that particular sector or that particular proposal. We have to accept that economic development is not simply a few dollars put in, have a few jobs for a short period of time, and then that fails and is done and dies. We have to understand that proper investment with strategy, with planning, everything, the whole array of feasibility, market analysis, all these things, impacts from global pandemics. All these things we have to be smart. But we've done it before, and we can do it again. And so not only sustaining our economies, but setting them up for continued development, going beyond survival to thriving. And that's my message to the leadership out there, to the tribes out there, is to guys think about this a little bit differently. We've had too many failures in Indian country. We've got to get the success stories going, but that means you have to change how you approach that business. And it can be done. It has been done, and it's going to be done again. And so I am confident Indian country can do it, and we're going to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking so much time today to be here with us on the Native Business Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Chairman Mark Fox, Mandan Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me join with you today. It's been a privilege and honor, and you both take care of yourselves. And my prayers and God's blessing for you and the family, and stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, Chairman Mark Fox. Wow. Share this podcast.
Yes.
You're going to definitely be able to use this one for many, 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 many days, weeks, months, as we continue to deal with this pandemic, as we continue to struggle and look for ways that we can help our community. Ladies and gentlemen, a wealth of knowledge for you, how you can better lead your life, how you can better help your community, how tribal leadership can move to deploy sovereignty to better help the future generations of our people, to help our people today. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Native Business Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Gary Davis.
And my name is Carmen Davis.
Until the next time.